The Tarrant County Master Gardener Association has partnered with the Tarrant Regional Water District to encourage water conservation. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean that water to meet drinking standards for our communities. They also work with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, Mansfield, and many others, to provide water conservation programs to the community. Conservation is an important water supply strategy to help meet the needs of our growing population. There are currently 2.3 million people living in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. If you're a resident of Tarrant County, you can sign up for a free sprinkler's checkup where a licensed irrigator comes to your home, provides a comprehensive evaluation of your system with recommendations to reduce water waste. There's also an event calendar where you can find information about future classes and workshops. So be sure and check out SaveTarrantWater.com to sign up for their free services.
Good morning and welcome to the Grass Gardens. These were established in 2010 by the intern class of 2010. And I think I forgot to tell you that my name is Starr Krottinger, and I have been involved with these grasses for the 10 years that they've been here. Not all grasses survive for 10 years, so some of the grasses that we started with 20 are no longer here, but many of them are. And that should tell you something right there, that grasses are a good long-term item to add to your garden. This particular grass is pine muhly. Muhleys are a native Texas grass, and there are a lot of variants of this. The muhly grass, and I think this one over here is deer muhly. It's not labeled, but I don't think they're the same. But you can see that they look very, very similar. This is a little larger, that's a little smaller, and these have bigger seed heads or flower heads on them than that one will. But muhleys are as a group, are probably the prettiest and best grasses to add to your garden. Most grasses are going to be relatively carefree, with the exception of having to trim them back. And if you're really, really lazy, they're going to come back even if you don't trim them. But if you trim them back in the early spring, and by that I mean probably February, and most people like to leave their grasses because they're as pretty as in the fall and the winter, as they're different of course, but they're very pretty even in the fall and winter. And trimming, you have several options there. You can cut, which is the easiest, fastest way. Native grasses were trimmed back by nature by grass fires, and they come back. Another way you can do that is use a rake and just pull out the dead stuff. But grasses are a great addition to a garden. But when we first did this garden, we did nothing but grasses, and we soon realized that gets kind of boring. So as time has gone on, first of all, we added rocks, and then we've added plants to sort of complement the grasses. And that in the middle there is a Blackfoot Daisy, which is also a Texas native that requires very little work to it. Starting with the Indian grass, which you see just a little bit over the sign here, and we have Indian grass all over in the garden. Right here is another example of the Indian grass. And one of the tricks you might want to know about Indian grass, it spreads by rhizomes underneath the ground. And if you don't want to have a huge patch of Indian grass, a good way to keep that from happening is to plant your Indian grass in like a 5-gallon plant container. And that'll keep those stolons from moving into another area where you may not want it. Since we're here, we're going to move on back to the next grass we have here, which is turkey foot, or it's actually called, oh lordy, it's big blue stem. Big blue stem, or it's sometimes called turkey foot, because if you notice, the blossom on the grass has 3 sections to it, much like a turkey foot would. This also uses rhizomes to spread, but it is not as aggressive as the Indian grass. I first became interested in grasses, and this is kind of hard to believe, but it was actually in Midland, Texas, which is not what you would think of as a grass capital of the world. But I was at what actually was a Master Gardener demonstration garden, and the first grass that I ever saw that just took my breath away is one that we'll be talking about in just a little bit, which is the Gulf Muhly, or Muhlenbergia capillaris. You may have heard of, in your history books, about the first people who came to the prairies and how they were on their horses, and they talked about grasses that were as tall as their horses for miles and miles away. Well, not all grasses were that tall, but there are 4 that are called the Big 4 because they grow so tall. 2 of those grasses are right here, the big blue stem and the Indian grass. The other 2 are little blue stem, not because it's little, but because it is a finer structure than the big blue grass. And the 4th one is switchgrass, which we also happen to have out here. As a general rule, grasses do not need a whole lot of water, and they are pretty tolerant to the soils that they'll grow in. We, in this part of Texas, have a lot of the heavy clay soils, and grasses are a good thing to put in those heavy clay soils because they'll do well. And as I said earlier, about the only thing you really have to do with it once you get them established is to cut them off, and you only do that to prolong their life and to prolong their beauty. Grasses grow from the inside out. In other words, you start out with a small sprig, and as it grows and matures, that clump gets bigger because it's growing out. Sometimes what happens is the inner, older part of the grass will die out. If you cut it back, that seems to prolong the life of that inner core of the grass. Some grasses do have preference as far as soils, but they're much more tolerant to various soil types than many of your plants are. And that's why they were so prevalent in the prairies, because they would grow in different soils and in different temperature extremes. And when you talk about the prairies, we're not just talking about Texas, we're talking about from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada, and you would find these grasses all through that area. One is the Gulf Muhly, or Muhlenbergia capillaris, and it's called Gulf Muhly as its common name for a very good reason. It's most prevalent in its natural state down in the Gulf area of Texas, which should tell you something about the water requirements of that grass, because it's comfortable near the Gulf, where they get a whole lot more rain than we do here in North Texas. It is one of the few grasses that's going to need a little bit more water than most of the other grasses we have out here. But it will also survive on less water. But there's a big difference between survive and thrive. Next to that is one of my very, very favorite grasses. It isn't quite as showy in bloom as the Gulf Muhly is, and these blooms are not fully opened yet. When they're fully opened, they fan out, so you have this long stem with these, almost looks like your grandmother's lace work up and down them. You'll notice that I told you earlier that the muleys are probably among the most, the prettiest grasses to be used in a garden setting, because their inflorescence, which is just another word for blossoms on a stem, are showier, and in particular in the case of Gulf Muhly, they're more colorful. Most grasses don't have great gorgeous blooms on them because they're wind pollinated. They don't need to attract bees and butterflies to do their pollination. Nature does it by just the wind. The Lindheimer's Muhly is also called Big Muhly because it does get quite tall. This grass has been here for 10 years. It's one of the original grasses. The Gulf Muhleys have been here for 10 years, some of our original grasses. So because we've taken good care of them, they're still full and pretty. There is an argument, or I shouldn't say argument, a discussion in the gardening world between whether to use natives or adaptives. And there is no right or wrong answer to that question. I'm a lazy gardener, so I tend to grow natives, because if I'm growing something that wants to live here anyway, then being a lazy gardener, it's probably going to live and do okay. Adaptives are plants that have come from either other places in our country or other countries. And those plants have been introduced to the area and may do just as well as a native if you put it in the right soil, right spot, right sun, right water, then it's going to do fine. But many, many, many years ago, there was a perfect balance in nature where the plants grew, the insects and the birds and the bees and the buffalo all worked together to keep things in control. So there are birds and birds and insects that only want to go to specific plants. So if you erase that plant from the environment, then you're erasing that insect or animal, whatever it might be. As I said, there's no right or wrong. It's a question that you have to answer in your own self. This is why Mexican feathergrass reseeds itself so well. And I cannot show you in the film here, but you find long hairs, which is mostly the mechanism for moving it from place to place. The actual seed is a teeny tiny little dot at the end of this hair, but you can see there's just clumps of it here, and it'll just reproduce itself. This grass in the corner here is Miscanthus adagio. Most people would call it adagio Chinese maiden grass. Miscanthus is a large family of grasses, all from China, that have been brought into the United States and Texas because they adapt to our area. The adagio is a small maiden grass. This is a sinensis, I think is the way you pronounce it, but it grows much taller. This has not curled like that has because it isn't as far advanced in its maturing process as that one has. But another grass that we don't have out here, but has been used in a lot of landscapes, is zebra grass, which is also a miscanthus. grass that has been bred to have white horizontal stripes all up the blade of the grass. But you can always tell it's in the family of the Miscanthus because it has like a white vein. The main vertical vein is white. And if you look at this one and this one, you'll see that same white vein. Grasses are very easy to grow. Most grasses require sunlight. There is another grass that you may have seen that we don't have out here because, as you can see, we have predominant sun. But there is a grass called inland sea oats, which can be used in the shade. It is more bamboo looking in that it doesn't have the long fronds like that. It kind of branches off, but it is a grass, and it has beautiful golden brown seed pods in the fall, often before the grass has turned, so you'll have the green grass and the golden seed pods, but we can't grow that here because we have too much sun. So most of your grasses are going to require the sun, but think about where they're native. They're native in the prairies, and you don't think of trees in the prairies. So that's why, generally speaking, grasses are going to require more sun than less. Water requirements are minimal to, with the Gulf Muhly, a little bit more. So once you get them established, they are not going to require a whole lot of care in that regard. This is a grass, and I actually didn't see it when I walked through earlier this morning, but it is one of our originals, and it's not, again, unfortunately, it's not something that you can get in the nurseries, but it's called purple 3-on, and it, like the Mexican feathergrass, is an early spring grass, and it has what is now a golden color because it has matured and is ready to go to seed. In the springtime, it is a purpley color, so it gives you a little bit of color in the spring. And this is as big as it's going to get too. This is one of our unsung heroes. It is the state grass of Texas, and it's called Sea Oats grama. And it's obviously, the name is because all of the little seed heads are on one side of the stem. As far as ornamental use, it probably is not going to be used very much because it isn't showy. But in the springtime, when it first comes out, where you have these little tulip things here, you have a brilliant red, but they don't all bloom at the same time, so you don't have the big burst of color. It's just one of those things that kind of sneaks up on you as you're walking past, and you do a double take and say, what was that? But it is our state grass because obviously it was a big part of our prairie before Texas became a people country. Another clump of the Indian grass. The fourth, another grass, and it's not going to help me here, another grass from the big four is called switchgrass. This particular variety is a lower growing variety and a variety that's not as aggressive as switchgrass can be. I have seen pictures of switchgrass on a horizontal with like this much above the ground and this much below it. Its root system can be feet and feet and feet long, but it is obviously a good grass to grow in deep soils, and it'll keep the soil there because it has all of those roots. Another thing about grasses is that they have what's called fibrous roots, and what that means is it has lots of roots all about the same size, as opposed to a taproot, which has one big long root with little bitty ones sticking out, which is why you can divide it, because it has all of those little roots. As long as you get enough root, and the general, when you're trying to propagate, you want to have more root than top so that your energy will go to developing those roots instead of maintaining the grassy part. Here's an example of what we've added to our garden. It's a autumn sage, which is a very dominant plant in a lot of our landscapes because as a native it's easy to take care of. So the switchgrass is right there. There's another little bit of Lindheimer's Muhly back there. Some more switchgrass. And then the last grass I want to talk to you about is little blue stem, which is another of the big grasses, the big four. I told you very early on that there are 4 grasses that make up the big 4 grasses of the prairie. We have seen the Indian grass, we have seen the big blue stem, we have seen the switchgrass, and the 4th grass is little blue stem. You can see that it is very different from the big blue stem, but it also has that bluish cast to the green in it. And this is actually beginning to turn the gorgeous rust color that it turns in the fall. This grass to me is underused, but it's probably underused because it's kind of contrary. It doesn't really like being treated well. It likes being abused. So if you condition your soil and make it all nice and rich, the grass gets lazy and just kind of falls over. But if you plant it in your good old clay soil, it'll do fine. The thing about the little bluegrass that makes it a good thing to put in your garden is the bluish tint to the green leaves and the rust color that it turns in the fall. We have next to it some fall aster that didn't cooperate with the little blue stem and has already bloomed for us. But when you have the purple blooms of the fall aster next to the russet color of the little blue stem in the fall, it makes a really dramatic color scheme. So if you're going to plant grasses and you want to plant something next to it, one of my favorite things to put next to a grass is Blackfoot Daisy, which we had at the beginning, because it stays low and it goes out and fills. Most of the beauty of the grass is not down low. So if you want to plant something with the grasses, then you're going to have to look again, the main things you look at with all of your plants, which is what kind of sun does it need, what kind of soil does it need, what kind of water does it need, all of those things that you look at for any plant you want to look at to put in with your grasses. You don't want to plant something next to a grass that's going to overtake the grass, but yet you want something that is going to complement it, and the grass will complement the plant. Generally speaking, if you have a tall grass, you can have something a little taller. If you're growing a grass that doesn't get much more than 4 or 5 feet, you want to keep your plant low just to keep the beauty of the grass up. I have used the fall aster, I've used the Blackfoot Daisy on the taller grasses. If you keep them trimmed, the autumn sage works well. And I'm sure there are hundreds others that you can think of that would do that. Well, I think we've made it all the way around our grass gardens. Thank you for coming to visit us today. Grasses, like many plants, are beautiful all times of the year. So invite you to come out at your pleasure, at your leisure, to view them at any time that you want. We are located in the far south corner of the demo garden, but we're right along the main street, so you can't miss us. Grasses are a wonderful addition to a garden. They make great anchor points to hold your garden together. And if you want to see what that, to think about how to use that garden, or if one of the grasses would work well in your garden, then you're welcome to come out here at any time and see it. You'll see how it's going to look, you'll see the color, and you'll see the size, so you can figure out if it's going to work well in your garden. Thank you very much for spending some time with me today. Bye-bye.